Hi, we're Josh
and Ariel Wamsley,
owners of Green Valley Tree LLC, based in North Windham.
We're proud to sponsor Connecticut East This Week and to serve the communities of Windham and New London counties with our tree removal and plant healthcare services.
Visit our website at greenvalleytreeworks.com for a full list of our services or give us a call on 860-234-4041. We look forward to hearing from you.
Finding new plant species in Windham County. We talked to botanist Bryan Connolly of Eastern Connecticut State University about the new plant discoveries and what it means for the area. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. We live in a world where we think we know everything and have seen everything, but the reality is our world still has many surprises for us, and those surprises come in a variety of forms. The flora and fauna around us is constantly changing due to human activities and also due to climate change. So it's important for us to keep an eye on our natural world and see how and why it's changing and whether that has a positive or negative effect. I recently caught up with Bryan Connolly, Assistant Professor of Biology at Eastern Connecticut State University, to talk about a recently published study he and others had put together about plant discoveries in Windham County to help update an important herbarium, which is a database of local plant species. Bryan, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So exciting finds. I mean, it seems that we live in a world where very rarely do we get that wow moment, but you've been having a wow moment out in the fields of Windham. Tell us about it.
Yes. So I did a study and an update of the flora of Windham County with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Stanley from the New England Botanical Club. Yeah, actually, there's lots of wow moments in field botany. There's always a new discovery that you can find. There's new species, either native or invasive or endangered, if you just kind of go out and look for them.
Now, you did, you basically were recently published by the New England Botanical Society. And as you say, this was a co-author with Lisa Stanley, the curator of NEBS Herbarium. Why is it important for things like this to be updated?
Well, there's a tradition of collecting botanical specimens in the Northeast, and people have used specimens, from the 1850s, like Henry David Thoreau's in Massachusetts, and have been able to show the trends from climate change. So you can actually see the flowering dates, earlier as the season warms up. Also, these types of inventories let us know what's here currently and what's disappearing, what's coming into the area. So we can have a baseline and then compare it to the past, and hopefully people in the future will look at things that we've done now and be able to compare the flora and see how the species have been changing.
Now, I understand from the information that we've been given that this study occurred over 4 days back in 2020, obviously with yourself and Lisa and the help of Eastern students. Just talk us through a little bit about what you actually did, because it's fascinating because you went everywhere within, obviously, Windham County.
Yes, I mean, we could have covered a lot more ground, but we tried to get kind of a sample of habitats. And so we went, agricultural fields, city parks, woodlands, wetlands, and we basically just collected what we found in flower. And we also had a list of kind of a hit list of things that we're interested in finding that we thought might be in the area and never recorded. So basically, we just met in the field and we did some searches and collected anything that was in an identifiable stage.
And so from that collection, I understand that there was 319 different species were collected. Talk us through a little bit, obviously not through the whole 319, but I know that a certain amount were native and some were introduced. Just to talk to us a little bit about some of that.
Yeah, so several of the species were actually never before documented in Windham County. I think it was 49 species or so. And of that, over 70% of those were introduced. So they're from elsewhere in the world. So they're not from the Northeast, mostly Europe and Asia. And then we found a small percentage of native plants that haven't been documented before. And then what was really interesting is we actually came across a highly endangered plant, the dwarf bulrush, and that's a threatened species for the state of Connecticut.
And why is that one endangered? Talk to us a little bit about that, because often we hear about things become endangered. Can you just give us a, sort of like a bit of a background as to why or how they become endangered?
Oh, sure, yeah. So the dwarf bulrush, or Lipocarpa micrantha, is a very small, diminutive grass-like plant, you could say. It has a very unique habitat. It grows in sandy places that are wet, and so it's usually like the edge of a river or a pond that generally has a fluctuating water level. And so it has this very specific habitat. And it's also kind of on the edge of its range. A lot of our endangered species in the Northeast are edge of range species that are endangered. They're not really endangered like in the main part of their range, but for the state of Connecticut, it's endangered.
And how exciting was it to actually find that?
It was really cool. I was not expecting it at all. I was out, with my students, and we were, I was showing them different plants for my biology plants class at Eastern, and I was just looking along the shoreline, and I said, "Oh my gosh, here it is!" And it'd never been found in the county, and so for I should say the protected species of Connecticut, it's actually considered threatened. There's 3 levels of protection, and the rarest is actually endangered, and that's 1 to 4 populations. And then there's threatened, which is 5 to 9 populations. And then there's special concern, which I can't remember, maybe it's 9 to 15 or something. But this is actually a threatened species for the state of Connecticut. So there's somewhere between 5 and 9 populations. But yeah, it's really cool. It's this tiny little plant. It's about 3 inches tall. There's several other species that look like it, but it has this really distinct flowering or fruiting structure that kind of looks like this miniature pine cone. And when you see that little tiny pine cone, it's only about, a quarter of a centimeter or something, you've got the species. So it's kind of exciting when you see that really distinct flowering structure on the plant.
Now, another thing I understand that you found as well as part of this survey was a discovery of a large invasive from Asia known as Himalayan balsam. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so the Himalayan balsam, so it's officially an invasive species. So invasive species are a subset of introduced, or AKA exotic species. So we have the native flora, which has been here forever, since the glaciers essentially. And then we have this whole group of plants that are introduced. And so they can be from, other places in North America, like the West Coast or the Midwest, or they can be from Asia or Europe typically. And so a huge number of our species, probably 40, 50% in Connecticut that have ever been found are actually introduced. But of that, a small subset, about 10% or less even, are aggressive. So they take over ecosystems and are problematic for native species. And those are called invasive species. And we actually have a group that officially declares invasive species as the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group. And this Himalayan balsam is an official invasive species, and it's prohibited from sale in the state. But we were out in the field and along a roadside, and in this wet ditch area. We were not expecting it at all. It's more typical of northern New England to find this invasive, but there it was. Several feet tall with bright purple flowers. So it was very distinct, and it was really interesting to find it.
And although you said you just found this small amount of it, I mean, I'm guessing from your comments about invasive and that they can take over or also like suppress native plants, it's important for us to know about these things, isn't it?
Yeah. So this in our region may or may not be an actual problem, but we kind of have some of these species on our list because they're problematic elsewhere, like our neighbors to the north in Maine have seen some of this plant. And so it's kind of a preventative measure. So it's sort of like we want to have these listed and be able to take action if necessary before they really take hold and just are unmanageable. So I don't think the Himalayan balsam is going to be a problem in Connecticut. It may be locally in a few areas, but we basically don't want a new Japanese barberry or Japanese knotweed coming in, and so those plants are really intractable. So this is kind of part of what we call the early detection, rapid response kind of philosophy. If we can find some of these invasives coming in early, we can hopefully get rid of them and before they've really taken hold and sort of metastasized, if you will.
And give us a sense as well, if you would, Bryan. I mean, obviously, many things get introduced into the country. I mean, do we know how these things end up where they end up?
Yeah, ultimately, it's people. So people are the vectors of these species, one way or another, at least to get to our general area. So yeah, through trade, either ornamental, or people are moving soil, people are moving like animal feed, and all sorts of different ways people are introducing the species, mostly by a trade. People moving hay, mulch, and then also just people with their shoes sometimes pick up things. During a lot of the early days, like with whaling and things like that, people actually had their ships full of ballast, which was often stones and rocks and things like that, and then they just like unload them onto the shore. So early on, we got species as far as when non-native people started settling the area. Secondarily, robins, starlings, things like that spread some of the berry fruits of these invasives, like the Japanese barberry or the glossy buckthorn, and bittersweet, Asian bittersweet. And then autumn olive is another one. And autumn olive is an interesting one because it was planted because it was actually thought to be beneficial to birds. And then it was, hindsight being 2020, it's really taken off and spread all over the place. And the birds secondarily have been the vector of that one. So the root cause is humans one way or another, and people love a lot of these plants. Some of them are beautiful. The Himalayan balsam is beautiful. Some of the Japanese barberry cultivars are beautiful. And so people have also, planted them and cultivated them because they look nice, but they don't stay on the cultivated landscape. And I just wanted to also mention that there are some people trying to breed some sterile versions of some of these, invasive but ornamental plants.
Now, another thing I understand is that the last time sort of a survey of this nature was undertaken was back in 1959. Why has it taken so long, do you think, for it to be updated?
Yeah, and this isn't a complete update. I would love to do a full comprehensive update someday, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. There aren't a huge number of botanists around. There are some. And there have been collections since 1959, many of them. The curators of the G.S. Torrey Herbarium at the University of Connecticut, mostly Les Merhoff, who's passed away, and also Bob Capers, have done several collections. And there is a tradition there. And they have a current curator as well. So there is the University of Connecticut that has done some of these things, but Eastern being in Windham County, I thought it'd be good to kind of reboot this effort. And, we only did 319 species. There's many more that we'll look for in the future, hopefully.
And I'm guessing it's important to keep these things updated because I think you said at the top of the interview, it's like climate change. And of course, we're seeing this, it appears more rapidly. I mean, we're seeing this with sort of like deforestation of our trees. Admittedly, that's, through parasites and bugs, but all of this is important, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, just trying to figure out, what's here, and also the native plants really are the base of the ecosystem. They provide the food for the pollinators, the caterpillars. The caterpillars are providing food for the songbirds. And so there's this whole sort of trophic, cascade if some of the things, in the base go extinct. So, for example, if there's a plant that's really important to caterpillars, and those caterpillars are very important to songbirds. So if you lose that plant, you lose the caterpillars and you also lose the birds. So it's important that way. But also just to see, are we getting more southern species? Are things, migrating, or are things just going extinct? So really important to have numbers and species names for comparisons, when we're going through time to look at the past and the future.
And I suppose another thing to ask as well about all of this is, can the public help at all? Or is the university interested in any help from the public? Because like you said, there's only so much that you can do, but there are a lot of people out there who are very interested in their environment, aren't they?
Yeah, there's some really interesting citizen science programs right now. I'm not directly involved in any of them. There's things called bud burst, which is a phenology, so keeping track of when things break bud. And there's also, which I do contribute to, there's this program called iNaturalist, which I really like. It's not just plants, it's plants, animals, fungi, and it's basically an app on your phone, and you can take a photograph and it will suggest an identification for you. And people will upload this and with the location. It's a really neat program. And also it's not considered an official record with iNaturalist, but it gives scientists a place to go. And so if there's a record of a species that's never reported from an area, and you see it on iNaturalist, and it's a place that a scientist can get to, a scientist may go and collect it and deposit it in a herbarium to make an official record of it. So iNaturalist is a very powerful program.
And also, if people are looking to put sort of like flowers and plants in their garden, I mean, would you suggest that they try to obviously purchase more like native plants, or should they have a mixture? I mean, what's the sort of advice there?
Yeah, definitely native plants. And there's several different organizations that work on native plants. There's a Native Plant Trust out of Framingham, Massachusetts, and they promote native plants and sell some as well. And then there's different resources on the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group website that basically have alternatives to invasive. So it will, have a invasive plant, and then it will give you a native alternative that does some of the same jobs on the landscape. And then there's several native plant nurseries in Connecticut and New England that sell native plants. Some are very common. You can actually sometimes purchase some species of native plants, like sweet pepper bush at most local nurseries and things like that. So yes, I highly, highly suggest native plants. They're a bit, some are fantastic and wonderful to anybody. Some native plants are a little more of an acquired taste, but I really like them. And they have to be the right plant in the right place. So you do have to, know what their requirements are for soil and water and things like that. But they're very important to plant for pollinators and for native insects and birds.
And I know, based on the information I have in front of me, like it says here, dandelions, most clover and daisies are non-native, but are also not considered invasive. So, I mean, those are quite good still to have in your garden, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of neutral, they're not gonna be problematic, and they do provide some what are called ecosystem services. So they do hold the soil, they do feed some pollinators, but they're probably not as good at providing ecological services as native plants. So they're kind of neutral plant. If you have a mix of kind of these, non-native, but non-invasive plants along with, some nice native plants, that's fine. I'm not, suggesting that you get rid of everything, but the more native plants, the better, in my opinion.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And obviously now that this has been updated fairly recently by yourself and Lisa Standley and obviously the Eastern students, people can be a little bit more aware of what is out there, and it's all helpful information. And we hope it won't be too long again before obviously there's some more updates, and who knows, possibly some more new finds for you when you go out in the field.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get back out there and collect some more and have some more to report soon.
Bryan Connolly, Assistant Professor of Biology at Eastern Connecticut State University. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, son, how are you feeling?
I'm fine, Pops.
What's on your mind?
I can't explain it. Navigating without a compass, eyes waiting, started to wonder. Metamorphosis, the loss of who you thought you is.
When your kid can't find the language, help them find the lyrics. Listen to the Sound It Out album and get tips and tools to start a conversation at soundidouttogether.org. Brought to you by Ad Council and Pivotal Ventures.
The warmer weather is here, and it's time to give your plants some health care. From mulching to aeration to growth regulator, remedial and preventative treatments against fungus, as well as insects like the spotted lanternfly and gypsy moth. Don't be reactive, be proactive, and keep your trees and plants in tip-top condition to avoid long-term health problems. Find more details about plant health care services. Call 860-234-4041 or visit our website at greenvalleytreeworks.com.
Time now for a look at some of the other stories making the headlines in the region recently, sponsored by...
Every number tells a story, a true story. Connecticut by the Numbers explores breakthroughs and challenges, issues and answers. Behind the headlines, across the state, follow the numbers. Connecticut news that counts. ctnumbers.news.
Connecticut is celebrating its first estuary reserve, which will help identify environmental threats to waterways and natural resources within Long Island Sound off the Connecticut coast. Emily Scott from the Connecticut News Service reports.
Connecticut's first National Estuary and Research Reserve designates more than 50,000 acres of Long Island Sound, adjacent marshes, and upland areas for research on climate resiliency, water quality, and fish and wildlife habitats. Patrick Cummins of the Connecticut Audubon Society has been a strong advocate for the reserve and says it can be a catalyst for critical conservation activity.
The research that sheds light on the strategies within the NER for things like climate resilience and mitigation will not only benefit those species, things like bluefish, salt marsh sparrow, semi-palmated sandpiper, within the NER, but will also benefit them wherever they occur, the habitats and the species.
Nearly 50 species listed under the Connecticut Endangered Species Act can be found within the reserve. University of Connecticut's Avery Point campus, which will be the research reserve's headquarters. The reserve receives funding from the state and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I'm Emily Scott.
Governor Lamont recently announced that his administration is releasing $7.29 million in state funds to purchase and protect 1,013 acres of open space in 17 Connecticut communities and $276,200 to restore and renew green spaces in 6 urban areas. The funds are provided through the state's Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program and the Urban Green and Community Gardens Grant Program, which are both administered by the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP. Connecticut's preservation of open space has helped define its landscape and preserve its important natural resources and natural beauty, and is one of the main things that makes the state such a great place to call home, Lamont said. These grants continue our open space preservation legacy and will increase the availability and quality of open space for all residents across our state, whether they live in an urban, suburban, or rural area. Since the Open Space Program began in 1998, more than $150 million in state funding has been awarded to municipalities, non-profit land conservation organizations, and water companies to assist in the purchase of more than 41,200 acres of land in order to protect natural resources and improve the quality of life for residents and visitors alike. The Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program assists local governments, land trusts, and water companies in purchasing open space using funding from the Community Investment Act and state bond funds. This grant program requires a match by the grant recipient and requires the open space land be protected by a conservation and public recreation easement, ensuring the property is forever protected for public use and enjoyment. The Urban Green and Community Gardens Grant Program provides funding assistance to develop or enhance urban spaces for public enjoyment and/or environmental education. In the Connecticut Examiner this week, after 2 years of hearing live, amplified outdoor music coming from Philomena's restaurant in Waterford, a group of neighbours appealed the town's decision to allow the restaurant another summer of outdoor entertainment, which they said has disturbed the quiet enjoyment of their homes. But the Zoning Board of Appeals unanimously upheld the permit and denied the appeal that alleged that Jill Stevens, the town zoning enforcement officer, had not followed regulations when she granted the new temporary outdoor entertainment permit to restaurant owner Michael Buscetto III. The permit allowed outdoor music live at Philomena's from 6 to 9 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays from May 6 through November 5, 2022, a total of 54 concerts. The issue, said attorney Mark Keppel, who represented the group of neighbours, was the permit was a misinterpretation of Lamont's 2020 executive order that allowed relaxed rules for outdoor dining. Keppel told the board that the order allowed restaurants that already had outdoor entertainment prior to March 2020 to continue, but did not permit restaurants with outdoor entertainment to begin. Keppel said that since 2020, the concerts had been happening illegally without any zoning permit or approval, and the music was very loud in the surrounding neighbourhoods. In the day this week, an elderly New London County woman, the second person to contract Powassan virus infection in Connecticut this year, died of the tick-borne illness last month, the State Department of Public Health recently announced. The department, which withheld the woman's name and town of residence, said she was between 90 to 99 years old. She became ill in early May and was hospitalized with fever, altered mental status, headache, chills, rigors, chest pain, and nausea, according to the department, which issued a statement confirming she was the state's second case of Powassan virus-related illness this year. The woman was known to have been bitten by a tick, which was removed 2 weeks before the onset of symptoms, the department said. Laboratory tests performed at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Laboratory in Fort Collins, Colorado, confirmed the presence of Powassan virus antibodies. In the Norwich Bulletin this week, as residents grow accustomed to Norwich's downtown roundabout, completed last September, the state plans a string of the circular traffic patterns in the western part of the city. Opinions differ on the state proposal, the first phase of which would replace 3 intersections with roundabouts along Route 82. A public hearing for the state's proposal will be held at the Kelly Steam Magnet Middle School on June 23rd at 7 p.m. This will concern the first of 2 project phases extending from Banas Court to Fairmount Street, expected to be completed in 2026, said Connecticut Department of Transportation Strategic Communications Manager Shannon King. And in the Chronicle this week, in order to better facilitate renovations at Windham High School, the Early Childhood Centre classrooms will move out of the high school earlier than planned. The move was recommended by the ad hoc Windham High School Renovators New Buildings Committee. The plan involves moving ECC classrooms out of the high school and into the middle school. Board of Education members were not required to vote on the plan. Early Childhood Centre Director Aliki Karaganis thinks it can be done, and she should know because I think she's moved the programme 19 times now, so she's pretty good at this, but we don't think it's going to have a negative impact, said Windham Superintendent of Schools Tracy Youngberg. ECC is currently housed in 2 locations, the middle school, which is at 123 Quarry Street, and the high school, which is at 355 High Street. The plan involves moving the ECC classrooms into a middle school hallway. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms, on demand, and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow, and share on your social media too. I'm Bryan Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.